Good morning. Wanted to go over a couple of chapters this morning with you and post these videos on Canvas. Let's start out taking a look at the book. Let me just kind of give you a little background on Chapter 1. Chapter 1 goes into some basic information about borrowing money to buy a home. The book goes in and gives really good explanations on terminology, such as, for example, on page 3, it goes into specifying, for example, the term principal, the amount borrowed by means of monthly payment over a specific period of time. And in the sidebar on each page are important definitions that that you'll realize are important when you get to the end of the chapter. Page 4 and 5 goes into generally the different kinds of investments that investors would look at putting their money into, and it goes into ownership investments. You can kind of read through that. Debt investments, corporate stock, how that relates into looking at an investment from the whole spectrum, basically. And then it goes into some more familiar terminology that the normal consumer out there would understand: savings accounts, securities, mutual funds, and so forth. Then on page 8, it starts talking about, the book starts talking about investment risk, and that is, we will use that the term risk quite a bit in this course as a whole. And liquidity on page 9, that's a term that you'll need to know. The yield, what an investor's rate of return would be. What are considered some safe investments versus more risky investments? For example, safe investments would be CDs, savings accounts, money market accounts, those kind of investments like that, from an investor standpoint, or have very little risk, so in essence they are considered safe investments. On page 11 and 12, it talks about interest rate risk, and I know that everybody is kind of the buzzword for really the past 10 to 15 years has been low mortgage rates. Well, low mortgage rates from an investor standpoint equates out to something called interest rate risk. So in these long-term mortgages, 15-year, 30-year mortgages at 4%, 4.25%, those kind of things, an investor is concerned about rising interest rates. So in the event our mortgage rates increase 7, 8, 9%, then you've got millions and millions of dollars tied up in mortgage pools that are earning 3%, 3.5%, 4%. So that is what interest rate risk is defined as. On page 10, it talks a little bit about lending risks, the risk of default. That's typically in a mortgage situation. Lenders do quite a bit of vetting, pre-qualification, checking credit, payment histories, and things like that to try to lessen the risk of a borrower's default. FICO credit scores are a good example. Job stability, salary amount, those kinds of things are all extremely important when a lender is assessing risk on a loan. And of course, that doesn't just, we're not talking about just strictly mortgage loans, particularly in this chapter. It could be any kind of loan. It could be a small business loan, it could be an automobile loan. Credit card companies assess the risk when a consumer makes application to have a credit card. So those kinds of things are all really important. The outline on chapter 1 is on page 15 and 16, and there are also some key terms on page 17 and 18, and then of course your chapter quiz on chapter 19. Chapter 2 goes into a lot of the federal terminology, the terminology that a lot of times you hear on CNN or CNBC or Fox News, and it gives you a little bit of background on the differences between fiscal policy and monetary policy. And on page 24 in the left sidebar, it kind of tells you about fiscal policy, government spending, debt financing, and taxation. And that is determined by the president and his administration. The Congress establishes federal tax laws which generate money for the government. And then on page 25, it goes into and gives you some background on the federal deficit and how the government operates and has operated since the 1930s in deficit spending. So basically, they're spending more money than they take in. Taxation in the right-hand sidebar. Of course, when the income taxes are higher, the tax rates are high. The consumer has less money to spend or invest, and they tend to prefer tax-free investments. And then it talks a little bit about the rules on capital gains tax and deduction of mortgage interest. You know, mortgage interest is a huge deduction for the average property owner, the average residential real estate buyer. That is basically a lot of the consumer's largest deduction that they're able to deduct other than their standard family exemption. There are, have been certain parts of Congress or certain factions in the government that have tried to eliminate the mortgage interest deduction in order for the government to obtain more revenue. And the National Association of Realtors has taken a really proactive stance on the mortgage interest deduction staying in place as not only as an incentive for people to buy property and be able to take that huge deduction, but basically just trying to encourage the government for more responsible spending where we don't have to tap into that resource there. Most capital gains exclusions do go into effect or are applicable for a person's primary residence or principal residence. There are some exceptions on that, and there are some limits. Typically, the limit would not apply in this Abilene market, but you never know. I mean, it could. And on page 27 in Chapter 2, depreciation deduction for investors. If you've got somebody that owns some investment property, basically this chapter gives you kind of an overview on taxation issues, government spending, the terminology, federal debt, federal deficit, And we don't ever, real estate brokers and agents never purport to be accountants, CPAs, but we know, we kind of know where our limits are on giving advice and staying within the scope of our expertise. Page 28, 29 goes into the Federal Reserve System, and on page 29 is a flow chart on the Board of Governors, Federal Reserve Banks. 30 and 31, particularly page 31 talks about economic growth and inflation, and it gives you real good definitions of those terms. Page 32, 33 is really kind of talks a lot about the Federal Reserve, what the reserve requirements are for commercial banks, and you might wonder, well, why is that important to real estate financing or mortgage financing? Is everything goes back not necessarily to the Federal Reserve, but the Federal Reserve kind of sets the tone for the economy, and in the state of the economy, the state of spending with consumers and things of that nature, and also the Federal Reserve, or the chairman of the Federal Reserve, sets the prime rate, which now is 0, I think. And of course, mortgage money is not based on the Federal Reserve rate. It's based on the yield on 15 and 30-year Treasury bonds. So when the yield on T-bills decreases, mortgage rates decrease. When yields on T-bills increase, then mortgage rates increase. So the yield on T-bills, typically when investors are buying Treasury bills, they are removing money out of the stock market. So typically in a scenario like that, the stock market is in a down cycle, so the investors are looking at a more, investors become more risk averse, and thereby wanting to place more money in the safe government Treasury bills. So that's why the Federal Reserve is important when we're kind of analyzing this part of the book. Page 37, 38 are your chapter outlines, and then page 40, 41 are your key definitions for the chapter, and then 42 and 43 are your chapter quizzes. So again, I hope this helps you. I know that in the past when I've taken online courses, it's always helped when the instructor or the professor puts some videos online where you kind of have a resource there. But anyway, again, I want to reiterate, if you do need to visit with me, give me a call. My office number is 232-8962, and of course my email, I've got 2 emails now on Canvas. So anyway, good luck.